You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Red Wire, sponsored by our super generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right. Every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man is here to help me through the news. So, Chrissy was going to come on the show for the end of the year, and we had it all planned out, but ended up getting a nasty flu, and that's going around, unfortunately. So it wouldn't have really been made for great audio with her coughing all over her microphone. And we're really sad that she can't be here, but hopefully she's getting better. And also, I'm glad it wasn't COVID. She says it's the flu. So I think that's probably the case. That stuff's been going around, that and that RSV thing that a lot of kids have been getting too. Lots of crazy stuff. Take care of yourselves over the break. And hopefully we'll hear from her in January. But today we're Han Solo again. And usually I have I used to have a glass of some alcohol, and I should have put some eggnog in my Han Solo glass. I had my first eggnog yesterday for the season, and really tasted good. I get the plain one, not the organic one or the one in the glass bottle or anything like that, just the plain one, and it works out pretty well. And it reminds me of going to HEB in Austin and grabbing some, I think it was vanilla milk or something. It was in a glass bottle, and it tasted like melted ice cream. It was like the most amazing thing. I haven't seen it ever since, but just, I guess eggnog is kind of like that, kind of like melted ice cream. So here we are at the end of 2022, and 2023 is fast approaching. It's crazy how fast things have gone, and this year has just gone bonkers and by so fast, and I'm really looking forward to what's coming up next year. And usually in this spot, we share what's coming up with Talking Headways, but it hasn't really changed much from the last Monday show. And given it's the end of the year, I wanted to talk a little bit about what ideas I might have for the next year and perhaps solicit some ideas from you all. I always like your ideas that you send in. I can't get to all of them, unfortunately, and some of them might be a little bit too hard to do. I had a request to do one about roundabouts, and I think that might be a good idea. So still thinking on that, but need to get the right person in to talk about roundabouts. But those types of things are really interesting. Just, if you give me just a blanket topic, that might be good, or a book or something that you read or anything like that, I'd really appreciate it. But some of the things that I've had an idea about are doing like a Star Wars episode about Star Wars cities, and I'm hoping to get that in before May the 4th this year. We've been planning it for like the last 3 years with folks, and to just never get around to it. For some reason, the time comes and the time goes and just never record. It never really quite works out. But hopefully we get a Star Wars cities episode, because I really want to talk about Star Wars transportation. As you guys know, I'm a big fan. I've also chatted with a friend who is going to do it with me, so I'm really looking forward to that coming up. So that's an idea. I also have a request in to interview somebody at USDOT, and who knows if they'll actually get back to me, but I'm going to leave this right here, that I did ask for an interview with somebody at USDOT, and I find media kind of funny in that way, especially when it comes to transportation and federal agencies and things like that. I have no idea what I'm doing, and I guess I'm the media when it comes to podcasting, and we have some great friends at USDOT that would really be fun to talk to, who have actually been on the show before. So we've had Robin Hutchison on, who is on our election night extravaganza, and we played that as a podcast too on one of our Monday shows, and I recorded some stuff from her actually in a previous episode that I never really got to before. She used to be at Salt Lake City, and then she was in Minneapolis doing some really cool stuff at Public Works there. And then Stephanie Pollock has moderated panels that have been on Talking Headways. And then also we've worked on some TOD research projects a long time ago together. So I've worked with her before as well. And I've obviously asked questions about her on the show to our guests, talking about recently about some emissions reduction stuff. Maybe we can get talking to her, but maybe we're just too small fry for DOT to know us. Oh, and Danny Simons also has been on the show, and she's in the office there. So, like I said, maybe we're just too small fry for DOT to notice us, or I do get a little annoyed sometimes, though, when I see Mayor Pete or somebody at DOT on late night shows, or Stephen Colbert or something like that, and they ask dumb, simple questions that I feel like are just, I know that that's for the general population, but I'm like, oh man, I really want to get the weeds. I really want to get into the details. And, I generally like those entertainment shows, but when I see, like I said, when I say Mayor Pete on like Corden or somebody like that, Seth Meyers, it's just like, okay, like, who cares? There's no substantive conversation here. And it would be nice to have a somewhat substantive conversation about issues you all cared about, right? Like the listeners of this show, you all are deep in the weeds. You're deep into the policy. You're deep into the issues. And I feel like I know that because all the conversations that we have on Talking Headways are really deep in the weeds and deep in the conversation. And a lot of the stuff that I ask people, I don't know much about, but I read the books that they write and I find hopefully interesting questions that we can get into that stuff. Maybe I can ask those questions, but maybe they're too nuanced or too hard for politicians to go at, or maybe they just don't have the answers at the moment. I don't know, but I think that that's an interesting thing. The whole media thing for the national press and politics and all that stuff. I know I'm an outsider. I kind of like talking to folks who are at a university writing a book, maybe more because they'll give me lots of honest answers too. They won't try to sidestep either. And for example, I know the War on Cars, for example, has been asking too for folks to come on the show, and they would have good questions to ask as well. So I know that's a thing that maybe it's just better to go and do a junket at Wired or something like that, or at another magazine where you can talk to 3 reporters and then they can ask you questions, but maybe not the Talking Headways podcast. I don't know, but it's out there. And also, what's frustrating about talking about to elected officials or folks at large agencies is they really want the questions ahead of time and they want to control the narrative as much as they can. I get it. I was really kind of bummed actually when we had Houston Mayor Turner on the podcast a while ago before I-45 started bubbling up even as big as it is now, the expansion there. But we really weren't allowed to ask questions on the topic, and so most guests are pretty great, and I'd say that I'm not giving them questions and they're pretty cool with it, and hopefully they are assured that we're going to have a fun conversation. And hopefully they're assured that I actually read their book or read their research paper or understand what they're talking about, at least to ask good enough questions. But yeah, most of the time we're asking people stuff that they're experts on and that they've talked about their whole life. And sometimes when you talk to like a mayor or a political appointee, upper higher levels, they're actually not in the weeds as much as some of the policy people are down underneath. But they do make the decisions that control, how things work out. So that's just kind of some of the juggling act that goes on there. And there's not too much I'm going to ask people that's going to be groundbreaking for them, but maybe these politicos, it's a different story. So hopefully that comes across too when you all listen to the shows, when you all listen to Talking Headways and some of the questions that we ask. So there's that. And another idea I'm working on, as I've mentioned, I think on the show before, is the Kingwood Greenbelt history. So I'd lived in Kingwood for a long time. I was born in Houston, in Humble, Texas, and I lived in Kingwood from when I was 0 to 3 years old, and then from when I was 9 to 18 when I moved to the University of Texas to go to college. And one of the amazing things about Kingwood is that they have a huge greenbelt system where you can ride your bike on a concrete trail through the woods. I think it's like 60 to 70 miles of trails, and you don't have to cross any major roads to get to any. It's between neighborhoods. They all have underpasses and things like that. And so I'm trying to get the history of it. I'm trying to get kind of the background of it. And unfortunately, the person who designed it passed away. Some of his contemporaries and his colleagues I've talked to on the phone, and I want to get back together with them and chat a little bit more. But a lot of them don't know where the idea came from. And so some of the folks that might know what the idea came from, the heads of companies of this major development company I've been kind of trying to reach out to, haven't gotten back to me. So I don't know if they just aren't taking calls or it's something that they don't want to talk about. I don't think that's the case because it's a really innovative idea and fun and kind of throwback. But I'll just keep trying, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of it and we can share an episode. And then finally, one regret I have at the start of the pandemic is that I recorded a number of interviews about my old colleague, Hank Dittmar, my friend, and I left them on my laptop desktop. And so I recorded interviews with other colleagues of his, with friends, and I wanted to tell you all about Hank's life and some of the stuff that he did. There's some really, he's just a different cat. And I even had some recordings I did with him before he died about his favorite place in London. But sadly, when the laptop died, the interviews died. Luckily, I kept his audio that I had on. I had recordings of it recorded and copied on a number of different hard drives. But the interviews that I did with folks died, and I just haven't had the heart to ask them to do it again. Unfortunately, I felt so bad. It was really demoralizing. I even tried to get the memory chip sent to a sophisticated memory recovery place in the North Bay, and they just couldn't get it out. So back up your computers, people, back them up. I also lost an episode on that computer specifically with editor Joyce Nyaro from Nairobi about her book, 10 Cities. And the book was all about clubbing in the 60s and 70s in Cairo and Kiev, in Nairobi and 7 other cities. And oh my gosh, it was a great read and it was a great discussion. And I'm still super angry that my laptop died. With all of the questions that I had about Hank and then this specific interview. I recorded it on the Thursday and then my laptop was dead on a Saturday. And I was, oh my gosh, I really wish I could have, shared that with you all. Definitely get the book if you get a chance. It's called 10 Cities. It's wherever you find your books and published by Spectre Books. You can get, you can probably get it at Bookshop or whatever. Actually, you know what? I should put it up on my Bookshop store. I know we didn't save that interview, and I know we didn't share it with you all, but it's definitely one that people should get, and it was really fascinating. And I asked Joyce if she would record again. I emailed her, and I never heard back, and I felt so bad because she took the time to talk with me at I think it was late at night my time. And she was in Nairobi, and we had a really good conversation. And she even, wrote me later saying it was such a fun conversation, and she hadn't done a podcast before. And then I emailed her and told her that it was gone. And oh my gosh, it must have been so disappointing. So totally understandable that she didn't want to come back and do it again. But seriously, folks, back your stuff up. I have all of my stuff now backed up, and when I record an episode, I immediately put it on another drive so that that type of thing won't happen again. The other thing that's worse, actually, is when I forget to record. And so I've done maybe 2 episodes before where I had, we were having a good conversation before the show, and I just decided to keep on talking into the show, and then I totally forgot to hit record. And and then so after the hour was over, I looked down and I'm like, oh crap, I didn't record. I didn't record the episode. And so we had to talk about it again, which actually, funny enough, the second hour that we talked, I asked kind of similar questions, but we actually had a really good discussion, which was interesting because she knew kind of what questions I was asking, but also she gave her a chance to reorient her answers towards the discussion overall that we'd had before. So I think actually the second recording was better. So I was super happy about that, but I was really worried, and I was also worried that I was wasting her time. I felt really bad, but in any event, if you can figure out which episode that is, that would be a really fun game to play. But yeah, so in any event, that is one of my biggest fears is talking to somebody and having a really great discussion and then it disappearing. And with Joyce in Nairobi, that fear came to be, and I hope it never happens again. But now I hit record as much as possible. In any event, that was kind of a fun meandering sidetrack. I also wanted to talk about really quick about advertising. My hosting platform, Libsyn, finally opened up advertising with major brands to smaller podcasts like ours. Small is obviously relative because it feels like we're a big podcast, but we don't get millions of listeners like some of those other ones do, the big ones that and love, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend and things like that. But that means you might hear ads at the start of the episode before it starts playing. So you might hear a Starbucks ad or a mental health ad or something along those lines. And, I've declined so far to insert any ads into the main parts of Talking Headways in the show and would never do it inside the content. I really hate that when people do that on shows, and actually it makes me kind of stop listening to their shows. But I do want to have it at the beginning because I think it's a valuable way to make a little bit of extra money and support the show. So, of course, most listeners are for new shows for the podcast, but older shows, we have 412 episodes of Talking Headways, 122 episodes of Mondays at the Red Wire. Those still get a lot of listens. So I might be, kind of putting some stuff back in the archives. But, like I said, I'll try not to overload folks with ads. I know they can be a distraction. Right now, it's only 1 ad at the beginning and 1 ad at the end. I think that's reasonable. It might go to 2, and I might put 1, maybe in the regular ad block of Talking Headways. I don't know, but I won't put them in the content, I promise. but they also help us keep the lights on and pay for hosting. So it's super helpful for that. And I can't believe some of the crazy inflation for certain things that cost, like Libsyn subscriptions or MailChimp subscription for the newsletter that I do. It's crazy. It's $100 a month now. When I switched from Constant Contact a few years ago, it was like $50 plus whatever you went over in the amount of emails that you sent. So it ended up being like $68 or $70. But now they want to charge me $100 a month for my MailChimp subscription. It's crazy. And so I don't know if it's inflation or it's actually just companies trying to make more money. I think that's more what it is, because with a thing like MailChimp, it's not like you have extra costs associated with the software that you built, but they just keep on raising the prices. So that's how it goes. But it's crazy. So anyways, every little bit helps. So thanks for putting up the ads. Hopefully they're good ads. I tried to keep it away from politics and stuff like that, but that's how it goes. And I just want to let folks know that it was a conscious decision that just didn't start popping up randomly one day. But they just kind of finally gave me the opportunity. I've been asking for a couple of years, but they wouldn't let me because I didn't hit a certain threshold, which is really high. But I think that now they're doing it because they see some value in it, and especially in our listeners and you all. So I appreciate that. Okay, but now for a couple of local ads. Thanks to everybody who has been ordering the bus and bike scarves for the holidays. We really appreciate it, and I'd like to. If you'd like to order from theoverheadwire.com, you can do that. Or if you want to order 5 or more, you can get a 10% discount. So give them as gifts. It's that time of year. Email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com if you want that 10% for the five scarves or more. We've had a couple of folks do that so far. Give them to friends, give them to colleagues. It doesn't even have to be for Christmas. It could just be because it's cold. I hear it's going to be cold this week, especially for a lot of places in the Midwest, which is good for Christmas. It's not so good if you're trying to stay warm, but I don't think I can, and also I don't think I can get them to you by Christmas if you order now. But like I said, it is still cold. So if you need the scarf, definitely pick one up before the new year or after the new year. As long as it's winter, it'll keep you warm. And also don't forget to order any of the books that we've covered on the show on our bookshop site, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. I mess stuff up all the time. I should put 10 cities in there, like I said, even though we didn't actually share that interview. But I'll try to see if I can put that in there. And then finally, we designed the shirt, Cars Are Cholesterol. You can get a mug or sticker or poster, or actually if you become a Patreon supporter at the $2 a month level for the podcast, you get one of those stickers, Cars Are Cholesterol. So I just got a whole bunch more. I ordered some, and so I'm going to give them away for folks in our handwritten note that we send out when you get a $2 a month one. Or if you're a $10 a month supporter, you get the transportation scarf of your choice, and then you get a handwritten note as well with the stickers. So I'll send those along as well. So cool stuff going on. And also check out Richard Wazensky, who is the designer. He designed the sticker. Obviously I had a general idea of what I wanted to see, but he was the mastermind behind putting it together to what you see now. So definitely follow him on Instagram, Dick David Sketches. He's got some really cool stuff. He really likes robots. So check that out if you get a chance. And then finally, if you want one of the t-shirts or mugs or stickers or whatever, you can go to bit.ly/carsarecholesterol. Get the purple one. Okay, this is episode 123. We're in session. Before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that you can get this podcast and Talking Edways wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts. RSS is the best. Thanks to folks who subscribe through podcatchers. It's awesome, and you keep coming back to the show every week. We really do appreciate it. Okay, here's the news. Here are a few stories that piqued our interest from the last couple of weeks. And as you know, the Overhead Wire newsletter, which I just talked about, the MailChimp, you can get a free 2-week trial if you want to get a chance. If you want to, we put together, we go through about 1,500 items a day, pull out 30 I think are the most interesting, and then we give them to our readers, our subscribers, and then they click on the ones they think are the most interesting, and then we share some of those with you all, which is really a cool thing. So first up, should transit be free? The argument over whether it is good policy to support free transit continues, with Jerusalem Demsus of The Atlantic believing that it doesn't make much sense if transit agencies are to reach all the goals that are set for them: climate action, traffic reduction, and getting people to where they want to go. She goes on to argue that the free transit policy push is a function of a larger urban political failure to improve public services by making hard and sometimes contentious choices. This was by Jerusalem Demsus at The Atlantic. Oh, free transit in the news again. I know some of you were upset at my stance on this in the past, so I don't want to go over that again too much. But I do think Jerusalem has a point about the failings of public service improvements and creating easy political wins writ large. There's a whole lot of process things cities and government entities could do to improve lives. And there's also improving the delivery of infrastructure that could really, really help improve people's lives as well. So give us bus lanes, give us bike lanes. Don't ask for a bike lane input for individual segments of road, but the overall plan, please. If you let car drivers design a bus lane, it won't be a bus lane anymore. Those types of things. I think those are frustrating to a lot of people. And I think that we discussed that kind of in the past with some of the ideas about, public input on specific designs. But a lot of this is in response to DC making buses free in the district. And I just saw today where I think Virginia has actually a law or something that actually makes it harder for them to do that in Virginia on the Virginia line. So, but hopefully they can figure that out. And I hope the plan works. I really do. I hope more people ride. And I've said before, channeling Scott Bernstein, a penny saved is more than a penny earned, because a penny earned, you have to pay taxes on it. That's one of the things I think is really interesting about, proper public management and of property and sales taxes. And I think those, if you do it right, you can yield benefits to the part of society that need extra helping hands. It does go back to that easy versus hard political wins thing for me. And I think Jerusalem kind of hit the nail on the head with that. It's easier to say free transit and something that you won't get as much pushback on in terms of politics, but a bus lane is really hard. And a bus lane, the process for that requires a lot more work. And free transit, you're giving people free transit, and that's great. But for a bus lane, you might be messing up somebody's car travel, and then that makes people mad. And you know how hard that is from a political standpoint. So there's a lot more examples. And actually, we'll get to a couple of talking points in a couple of these articles about the same kind of theme. But I just think that was a really interesting kind of discussion from Jerusalem. Okay, more than 5 senses for architecture. 5 senses aren't enough to perceive our environment, say architects, by using philosophy known as phenomenology, like phenomenon. We might be able to add a few more senses to the list of how we react and take in buildings. 2 other experiences include how you move through a space and how your body responds to it. If architects take this to heart, it might be possible to design better environments for people, not just photographers. Farzam Sapanta at The Conversation wrote this one. That last photographer dig was mine. I know that a lot of people like to take pictures of architecture, and a lot of times the pictures of architecture don't have people in them. And it's pretty, but it doesn't also look like a city. And I know that for a fact, from somebody who had to look for pictures for books that we were writing. One of them was a streetcar book, and another one was a larger book about something, urban planning and TOD. It's really hard to find pictures with people and transit and buildings in it. People want to take pictures of just the building or just the people or just the transit, but never together. Them all together is what makes it really dynamic. So I think that's an interesting kind of commentary on architecture generally, but also the photography that comes along with it. But I thought this one was cool. I thought this article was cool. And I think, as you know, I like to think about how you experience places. touch, smell, sound, sight, taste, vestibular movement, and body position are these 2 other senses that they're talking about. And soon we'll have a piece, a Talking Headways episode with some Dutch sound engineers. That's going to be really fascinating, and the sound of cities. And I think that that's really interesting. So, there might be more than 7 senses, and memory actually strikes me as one as well. So there's probably 7 senses in this article, but there's probably more than that. Because when I think about memory, for example, when you go to a place and you've been there before, you have memories there, or you have thoughts of past, or you have feelings. The memory one and how it ties to thinking about sound as well as other things. I think I've shared this with you all before, but when I drive back from Austin to Houston, or when I drove back, I should say, I don't do it anymore, but from school to home for, say, Thanksgiving or Christmas, where we're close to now, I drove the same road. And on the same road, I actually had the same experience each time because I turned on the same music each time for the same segment of road. So I hit the CD, the Tonic CD, the Sugar album. I started playing it when I made this one turn, and then I went the same speed every time. And so I had this memory of this place, this road, this winding road through farms. And I think that that's a very powerful thing, tying music, sound to an experience, to the way that you're experiencing the land around you. And so I think that possibly could be another sense as well. Whenever I hear that album, I can see the road. I can see where I am on the road. And it's really fascinating how all those things tie together. But this thing, phenomenology, the science of phenomena as distinct from that of the nature of being, an approach that concentrates on the study of consciousness and the objects of direct experience. That definition was kind of hard for me to understand, so I found this other one for you all. So phenomenology is the study of structures of consciousness as experienced from the first-person point of view. The central structure of an experience is its intentionality. It's being directed towards something as it is an experience of or about some object. An experience is directed toward an object by virtue of its content or meaning, which represents the object, together with appropriate enabling conditions. So phenomenology in architecture refers to a shifting focus on giving users an experience. So basically what they're saying in my translation of the definitions here is that they're trying to create an experience with the architecture when you approach it, right? So when you go up to a building, you have all the senses that you feel when you approach a building, whether it's something that smells like it's a kiosk or something from the building. It might be something you see. It might be some sound that reflects off the architecture itself. And as the article notes, we can also think about it as our perception of approaching a building. A city or object within an environment depends on many factors. Approaching a city in the middle of the desert is entirely different than approaching a town in a forest. And then it goes on to say, you can perceive and see a city in a desert in plain sight, and you might perceive the duration it takes to get there longer than it is in reality. When approaching a town in a forest, you will be busy looking around the forest, looking at animals or trees, and experiencing a shorter time than what it took you to get there. So when I read all this and all the definitions, this is, in my mind, an explanation of why some cities are ones we love and other cities are ones we don't love. It's the way we approach our destination through walking, cycling, even, whether you're in a vehicle, active streets, activated facades, buildings that aren't boring, and how you approach the destination and what you experience on your way there is what makes it good or bad design. Think about like an arterial street that has really bad traffic and it makes the experience horrible. That just reminds me of, walking around London, where the experience was pleasant. There were trees, there were, windows for shops, and there were really cool architecture and buildings, and you could walk for hours and hours, and it didn't seem like hours and hours. But if you walked for hours and hours on an arterial street, on the sidewalk there, while cars were whooshing by you, those hours and hours might seem like days and days. So this is this perception of how architects can actually create a building that influences how you feel about a place, and how you approach it is the sense that you coming up with when you're approaching that building. So I had no idea about this philosophy before, but it could also maybe be tied to experiencing transportation as well. And, not just walking and how we experience cities, but maybe how we experience, our transportation, whether it's biking or getting on a bus, how the bus, moves through the city. It's always more interesting to be on a bus that goes through an interesting city than it is to be on a bus that goes through a place where there's a lot of parking lots and really bad urban environments. So it's interesting how we think about designing the city, and this look at it is actually very good at explaining why we feel the way we do. I really think that's interesting. Next up, is the rush to electric vehicles an expensive mistake? Sustainability experts are worried about the rush to electric vehicles, believing that they are here to save the car industry, not the planet. Building large vehicles to transport humans around is still not the most efficient way to move about cities, but it gets complicated and political when trying to sort out the details of how to accomplish climate goals. This was by Don Pittis and CBC News, Canada Broadcasting. We've talked about this before a lot, and I thought it was interesting that a mainstream media outlet was questioning the wisdom of an extreme focus on EVs. But again, EVs are kind of the easy way out. We designed everything around cars, so electric cars is just a fix, and fix it and forget it solution. It's just a fix, a quick fix. And so, today, for example, CALW, The California Air Resources Board here in California came out and said that we really need to reduce driving if we're going to hit our climate goals. But when it comes to how to enforce or incentivize active modes, they defer and depend on other entities in California, again, passing the buck. What that tells me, and especially as it pertains to this electric vehicle's expensive mistake, we're spending all this money on trying to kind of create a system that's similar to the system that we had before, because that's the system we're trying to put the input into. But we know that that's not the system that's going to get us to a better climate change outcome. And we know from like the RMI folks and from others that, basically we're going to need to reduce driving if we're going to actually reduce emissions. And electric vehicles are something that are necessary along the way, but they're also kind of a crutch to a certain extent. There's a lot of things that go into an electric vehicle, especially the heavier ones. We've talked about that before even, where, it's actually worse. So a Hummer with a battery that's the weight of a small vehicle, those could have been, 100 e-bikes. And so thinking about, where the resources are going and the mistake that it could be to invest in trying to keep people getting large vehicles that maybe they don't need in the situations that they're in. For example, like I don't need a big truck. Some people do, and that's great, but I don't need one. And so when the car companies are selling majority large trucks, and even though some folks don't need them, some folks do, of course, but some folks don't need them, you're starting to have a sustainability gap in there where there could be other alternatives. So I just think that's interesting, especially that in mainstream media. I know Canadian Broadcasting Company might not be mainstream for most folks, but I think it is for me. And I think it's interesting that they allow people to come on there and have differing viewpoints. Okay. Are owner occupancy requirements driving up housing costs? Cities across the country are examining regulations on a number of fronts, including parking requirements and zoning regulations, but one of the regulations has received less attention: requirements for owner occupancy. These requirements often keep neighborhoods less diverse from a racial and economic standpoint, and often keep out positive developments like ADUs. This was by Karen Kroll in Smart Cities Dive. Recently we've been seeing discussions about how neighborhoods are trying to keep out institutional investors by using these types of occupancy requirements. And one of the ways that they do this is by writing in the deed or writing in the neighborhood association that all of the people that own homes, you can only be, all the homes have to be owner occupied. And they do this in condo complexes too. It's like, I know that, for example, in Oakland, in some areas that, you have to have 85% occupancy owner occupied. If you don't have that, then I guess the insurance companies aren't super happy about it or something. So there's these restrictions that are not just for single family homes, but for condos as well. So it's interesting ways to try to limit the type of people that can rent homes in an area. The problem is that the limits where people, can live and what types of people can live where. And, I don't have any love for Wall Street homeowners. I do think that there are better ways to kind of go about this than trying to restrict, who can live in housing. So that's kind of a problem that I have. It's almost like, trying to, go back in time and restrict housing a certain way. But there's actually some new legislation. It's called the Stop Wall Street Landlords Act on that specific institutional investor type of movement. And I think, Congress is working on the bill, and they're trying to curtail some of the worst impacts of Wall Street on the housing market. The Stop Wall Street Landlords Act would bar corporate investors from taking tax breaks, like the mortgage interest deduction, which I didn't realize you could do if you weren't living in the home that you owned. Ban Fannie and Freddie from backing loans to Wall Street buyers, and impose a transfer tax on the sale of homes. And there was an article actually in Vox about this law that they're trying to write. And I think Ro Khanna, who's legislator in the House, he's in San Jose, is part of this movement. And, of course, not everybody's a fan. Economists and Wall Street people are not. Obviously, it's not going to be the end-all, be-all of trying to change the housing crisis, but it's one small tool in the larger tool shed. Like everybody says, we need a whole bunch of stuff, not just, there's not one solution to any of this stuff. But I also think that this idea that owner occupancy requirements are driving up housing costs, I think that's probably true to a certain extent because, when you restrict, then that's when, it gets more limited in the amount of supply, and then things keep going up like they have throughout most of the pandemic. Although it's slowed down a little bit now, I'm sure that once we get out of it, it'll go back to gangbusters because of the limited supply. Okay, 100 billion lesson in how to not build transit. If you've been living under a rock, you might still know that transit construction costs in the United States are out of control. Everyone seems to know it, but politically just can't seem to bring themselves to care. And perhaps the worst example of it happens now to be the $100 billion blank check for the Gateway project in the Northeast Corridor. Not a single project built to connect people, but a long wish list from railroads and transit agencies. This was by Aaron Gordon in Motherboard. So this was an interesting lesson from this piece about the Northeast Corridor and the $100 billion Gateway project. It's according to Aaron, it's made up of a bunch of wish lists. And we're not planning transit projects to get people from A to B, but rather to fix a bunch of good old boy needs that could be done with other funding. And so, I really wish that we could figure out a way to build projects, not just figure out a way to make things run the way they used to do and add a tunnel in there. All those wish lists add up to project cost X. The Grand Paris Express cost a lot of money, and it was actually a scandal. And I can't remember the exact cost, but it was sort of like $16 to $37 billion. But they built a whole suburban transportation network, and we're here sitting with one section of the Northeast Corridor trying to say that it's like 3 times, maybe 4 times the cost of a whole suburban transportation network. That's ridiculous. So a lot of these transit costs, apparently people don't care. Apparently the politicians don't care about how much it costs and aren't trying to rein it in. But, this piece specifically by Aaron is worth a read on its own, even if you've read a lot of the literature. I think it kind of points out some really key parts of that whole wish list thing that I hadn't really thought of much before either. So as you know, all the articles we share in the show notes, so check that out if you get a chance. And all the articles actually are in the show notes, like I said. So there's lots of really good stuff in here. Okay, fine. Next up, short-term rentals creating small-town problems. Short-term rental companies like Airbnb and VRBO are causing problems for small tourist towns across the country. The pandemic saw increases in people who could work anywhere and travel, which has increased the value of vacation homes in these spots, but also pushed out long-term residents. In Sedona, Arizona, with its picturesque red rocks, up to 15% of the housing stock is used for short-term rentals, with no relief in sight for workers who keep the town running. This was Rosie Bradbury in Wired magazine. 15%, that's a lot of housing stock. That's just VRBO and Airbnb. I mean, Sedona's pretty, but that's a lot of rental housing off the market. So I hope they get this fixed, and that's kind of a tough thing there. A lot of these are big companies that amass large portfolios of properties, and I guess there's a market for it, but there sure are problems for local residents, and I hope that somebody can fix some of these issues with taking housing off the market and using it for other things. I mean, folks, a lot of those houses I'm sure sit empty, but they still make money a lot of the time, and enough money to pay off the bills. So, tough times, I think, for a lot of these smaller towns, small tourist towns specifically, for folks who are living there and working there. Okay, here's a couple bonus items. I'm going to go through these, and I'm not going to leave too much commentary, but I think they kind of speak for themselves. The EU has approved of France's flight bans for 3 routes that have competitive high-speed rail alternatives. French lawmakers hoped it would impact 8 routes, but was approved only between Paris, Nantes, and Bordeaux and Lyon. So between Paris and Nantes, Paris and Bordeaux, and Paris and Lyon. This was in Politico EU. Next up, more healthcare providers are focusing on the social determinants of health, whether people have good food, a healthy environment, and a proper roof over the head. Mercy Care in Atlanta has pledged to pay rent on 10 housing units close by in order to help people get better outside a hospital bed. This is a huge thing. I mean, trying to give people housing because otherwise they'd be in the emergency room, and that takes up a bed that other people can use, and it actually helps people, get back together, get themselves back together if they have a place to live rather than going back out on the street or rather than staying in the hospital bed. So I think healthcare organizations are going to start thinking about this a lot more. Hertz rental car company was found in court to have falsely accused customers of stealing vehicles when they had returned the vehicle or had paid for an extension. One woman was jailed for 37 days away from her family, and one man 6 months after a failure to make a hearing date. The company will have to pay $168 million to settle the 364 cases, but expects their insurance company to pay for most of it. None of these executives or people involved in the policy will be punished. New York Times. That's crazy. So basically, all these people, they probably, it was calculation, and they decided that it was going to make them money, and so the insurance is going to pay for it, which is crazy. That nobody's being punished for this bad policy where somebody's jailed for 37 days even when she paid for her vehicle. And I know that this article specifically makes it so that I will never ever rent from Hertz if I have to rent a car. New York Times, that was in. In Berlin, new parking rules that allow bikes to park in paid car parking spots for free are getting criticism from both sides as people expect street fights to break out over parking disputes. The city says the rules are about uncluttering sidewalks and pulling bikes into street parking spaces away from the sidewalk. This was in Bloomberg CityLab. Congress is creating a new financial reporting rules for cities and states called the Financial Data Transparency Act. The rules, which would require digital submission of financial statements, will be created by the Securities and Exchange Commission over the next 2 years. Cities will be frustrated, however, because they believe it's an unfunded mandate, with some estimates putting the cost at $1.5 billion, likely impacting very small cities the most by making them buy and learn new software. Most of them are still using PDFs for financial reporting. This was actually sent to the president's desk, I think, yesterday. So this is something that they'll have to do. I think it's actually a bonus for bond buyers, really, because all these things can be analyzed by a computer. And it's kind of like when the stocks went on the computer markets, where you could just kind of write an algorithm and trade and all those things. I think this is going to be like that for bond markets for these smaller cities that are borrowing, and then these big bond buyers can actually go in and do some really big spreadsheets with all of the places that they bought bonds on and trade and sell and all that stuff. So I'm interested to see how it actually works out, and I think that's why they got migrated to the Securities Exchange Commission from another spot. But I'll be watching this one because I think there's something kind of strange about it. I understand the digital reporting, and how that it's important, but also I'm a little bit worried about how that affects small towns as well. Okay. EPA found zero progress in fuel economy as manufacturers continued to sell more SUVs. Other models have become more efficient, but were offset by the larger vehicle sales. The 25.4 miles per gallon for 2021 matched 2020. This was an ACEE. Research out of England has found that only 26% of the public believe that buses are a form of green transportation. However, when told the bus is electric, that number skyrockets to 81%, and 55% say that they would take buses more often if they were electric. I wonder what these numbers would look like in the United States, I say. Traffic Technology Today. And then finally, Fairfax County, Virginia is looking to change the way it does transportation evaluations for new development projects. A new additional measures of effectiveness metric could act to help active transportation projects and reduce unnecessary road widening. This was in Reston Now, and this reminds me of a lot of the move to away from a level of service and to a VMT measure that California did with SB S743 a number of years ago, and we did a number of things on that. But I think this is interesting. Other counties are going to start doing this measuring, and it's going to be cool. Okay, so hopefully that's a good amount of news to send you in the new year. Let's go have a little bit of fun. This week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, so we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month will get you some stickers, including the Cars Are Cholesterol sticker, and $10 a month will get you one of our scarves, as well as the handwritten note and stickers. So check it out, patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Also get your bus-only scarves, your bike-only scarves, theoverheadwire.com. Listener questions and comments. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, or feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. If you have questions for Chrissy when she comes back, feel free to email those in as well. And finally, Puppies and Butterflies is a part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. So how about that World Cup final? Crazy. Messi is definitely the greatest. He's the GOAT. He's got 37 trophies, including Copa America and the World Cup. Tough competitions, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does next, but also just looking forward to getting back into club soccer. And, finally, I'm also looking forward to a new year that's great and a good holiday. Looking forward to seeing my family and hanging out for a few weeks away from news and social media, and we'll be hopefully be stepping back a bit until January 2nd, when we'll be back for the newsletter, and we'll be taking a couple weeks off. But in the meantime, we'll have a flashback talking headways this Thursday. Next week will probably be something from Railvolution that we released on the Railvolution podcast, which I produce as well. Definitely check them out if you have a jonesing for some new content. The Railvolution podcast, it's a great one. You all hear a lot of those shows here because we migrate them over, but there's a couple of them that don't get migrated. So there's a couple extra content things that you all probably want to check out when you get a chance. And so I wish you all a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, Happy Festivus, or whatever makes you happy, any of those, Kwanzaa, etc. And of course, Happy New Year. Looking forward to a 2023 that's great and happy and fun, and we get a lot done in the transportation and urban planning space. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. I couldn't be here without you, and just amazing support from everybody all year. Just some really great notes, great lessons. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next year. You all keep up the great work. I know that you're out there. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense with all the craziness in the world, but we are doing good work. We're trying to get, people to the places where they need to go. And I love you and appreciate you. So thanks so much. So you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. You can find me on Mastodon, The Overhead Wire at SFBA social, SF Bay Area. I might have a little bit more to say about Twitter in the new year, but for now I'll be lurking around there still, even as it burns down. But anyways, thanks for joining us at Mondays at the Overhead Wire. Thank you to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast. We'll be back in the new year. I really appreciate you all, and hopefully Chrissy gets better, and we'll talk to her next time. We'll talk to you next time as well.
Talking Monday.